It's so good to be here.
So good to have you.
Yeah, surreal in a way. I am Chana, or Chani, as some people call me.
Okay, but Hannah for today.
Yeah. I grew up in Crown Heights, Brooklyn,
Heard of it?
um, before it was cool.
Right.
Before it was cool and after it was cool. Yeah, I grew up when mainly the only Jews who were there were Chabad
Right.
folks.
Same before the hipsters moved in.
That's right. But after like a really cool period of time when there was like mega diverse Jewish community there.
Right.
So, you know,
Somewhere in that
at
time,
a
right?
perfect time.
Right.
I grew up with the Rebbe, with the Lubavitcher Rebbe.
What does that mean? Sorry to interrupt you.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So the last Lubavitcher Rebbe had a Hasidic court. I mean, his father-in-law had a Hasidic court established the court in Crown Heights. And it means that I grew up kind of as a small child in a Hasidic court. And that was pretty unique because even though I had many, many classmates, not everybody, like fathers, davened at 770.
Right.
770 is the main shul. I grew up going to 770 my whole life.
So the Rebbe was still alive when you were a small child?
Yeah, the Rebbe was alive. I would grow up going to bring-ins. There was like a siren. There were like all these different time periods and stuff, or things that would go on. But like there was a siren that would sometimes go off, like similar as like the Arab Shabbos siren in Crown Heights.
I didn't know they had that.
When something was going on in 770, and there was like a short period where there were also beepers. They were called Mashiach beepers.
Oh wow!
Okay. And they would beep like when something was going on in 770.
So when Mashiach was coming, it would just beep.
No, like when something was going on in 770,
Okay.
And so I have memories, just sort of being a small child, being woken up in the middle of the night, right?
Wow.
Like 9 p.m. or whatever it was, 10 p.m. Getting dressed in Shabbos clothes and running from our apartment building in Brooklyn and Empire all the way up Brooklyn Avenue to 770. And it was like a streams of Hasidim, like from everywhere going up, running to 770, and then standing for hours and hours and hours in line to get a contras, something.
What's a contras?
A small booklet.
Okay.
Hasidic. I mean, it literally.
Wait, so when you were waking up and running, you didn't actually necessarily know what you were even going for. You just knew that there was something was going on, and everyone
was. We're going to the Rebbe.
Wow.
And so that's from when I was like much littler, much younger. And then eventually the Rebbe had a stroke and things sort of shifted. For a little while, we would get to see the Rebbe in like these small little windows. And I remember it was Sukkot, and I remember what I was wearing. It's like dressed with this matching headband, like floral printed dress. And everybody was facing towards the back of the shul because we were waiting for like the Rebbe to appear in the windows. These Hasidim who like loved and missed seeing the face of the Rebbe for like on Chag.
Right.
And I remember I was standing one of these with my father towards the back of the shul. There's like the narrow tables that people would daven with. And I was standing on top of it, and as soon as the Rebbe appeared, everybody surged forward, and I ended up under one of the tables, obviously, like away from my father, and lost my headband, which was like this epic.
But you're okay. That was.
Yeah, so like that, and I also remember like there was just from Farbrengen, like when the Rebbe eventually moved up onto the porch, standing, everybody would hold out little l'chaim cups, and once somebody's l'chaim who was standing in front of me like poured into my eye, like right behind me. There's just like all these, it's just like, and these are just tiny little like funny stories, but like this was my life. Like I grew up, I was in Farbrengen. I like to tell people that like when you see pictures of thousands of Hasidim, in the
in there
bleachers,
somewhere.
There's a world underneath where there are little kids. And like we would call it like under the feet or zwischen the feet, like which means under the feet. We would tell our friends like, I'm going to see you under the feet, like between the feet. That was our little playground,
Do you speak Yiddish, by the way? You just said that very like fluently.
Yiddish is my first language, yeah. We have like 2 generations in our family, and like the top 4 of us, like we spoke Yiddish, and then eventually there was like enough English in the house where that didn't really connect.
Okay.
I actually didn't realize until I was an adult, and I had a friend who like doesn't speak a word of Yiddish sitting at our Shabbos table, and suddenly she pointed out, she was just like, what are your parents saying? And I'm like, why are you asking me a weird question? Like, they're just talking. And she's just like, they're talking a foreign language that I don't know. And I'm like, oh my God, my parents are speaking Yiddish. Like, I didn't realize that.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, grew up deeply, deeply entrenched in Chabad Hasidut.
You no longer live in Crown Heights?
I no longer live in Crown Heights, feel like a deep home in Crown Heights.
Even when you go back now, you...
Even when I go back now, I mean, like, my grandfather's face is like on a bunch of trucks around the around the neighborhood.
What did your
my
grandfather
opened a fish store in 1959, I believe. And it's like, it's actually a Brooklyn landmark, his fish market. So Raskin's
the trucks
fish market, the trucks like are all over, and my great uncle was across the street and had Raskin's fruit. So like my name is like, it's like my neighborhood.
Wow.
But yeah, I've since journeyed away, been sort of journeying on my own path for a little while, as you know. But I guess, you know, the journey is ever evolving, so I have no idea like where I'm going to go or what's going to be. But one major piece that's been a huge part for me has been the nigunim that I grew up with. So the music of my childhood has like really like escorted me, walked with me. I kind of explain it like, you know how kids walk with like a blinky, you know, or like a little like stuffed animal, and it's like,
so that's their comfort.
It's my comfort. Yeah. Wow. And it's different than a stuffed animal because it doesn't get ratty. Like, it hasn't gotten ratty. If anything, it's like a stuffed animal that's like suddenly extraordinarily like new and familiar and nostalgic and new again and alive. And and eventually somehow miraculously, like, that's really become like my work now, which is
okay. So we're going to get to that in a minute. I kind of want to go back for a second. So as a child, I mean, obviously you grew up in that world and, you know, with that whole thing happening around you. Is there like a specific earliest memory that you have maybe of a particular Chabad Nigun or a situation where, you know, maybe if you were to hear it today, you'd be like, I remember that. I remember where I was when I heard that.
Yeah.
Yes? Okay.
I'm saying there are a bunch of different ones. I mean, I also have like a really wild memory. It's like I really remember things, and I've confirmed them with other people from when I was 2.5, 3 years old. And so even a little bit earlier, but not Nigun related things.
Right.
One of my favorite Nigun stories that I love to share, and I recorded this on my album, was my father was a high school, like I said, a high school teacher. He taught Hasidus, and basically we lived in this tiny little apartment in Brooklyn Empire on the 4th floor. And one night I was sleeping and woke up again, like in the middle of the night, and noticed that the hallway light right outside my bedroom was on. I must have been 3 or something like that. Came out, see this like really tall bacher who like scoops me up. I hear noise, and there was a farbrengen going on in the like living room, dining room, all things room.
Right.
And he just scooped me up and sat me down on my father's lap. And they started singing this nigun that I had never heard before.
Okay.
It's like Hebrew words and then Yiddish words. And I like that, it's like this wild nigun that I learned then.
Is it on your album?
It's on my album.
Okay,
yeah.
Yeah.
But then to answer your other question, it's like, let's say when I hear Avinu Malkeinu, the Chabad Avinu Malkeinu, like I am immediately transported to like Yantif, like the opening, right? Because in Chabad, they sing that in 770, they sing it to open the whole Yantif.
Right.
Like to open the whole tefillah. And so it automatically like
it's such a powerful tune.
It just puts me right there as like a very tiny child squashed between thousands and thousands and thousands of Hasidim singing.
It's pretty amazing. I guess you think about like, you know, an average kid, you kind of grow up with nursery rhymes, and they, at a certain point, normally at age 5 or 6, kind of expire in terms of what they do for you. But there's something so powerful about a nigun that, I guess with time, it can have even more meaning and be even deeper. And what I'm always fascinated by with nigunim is that, for the most part, from what I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, they weren't necessarily written by musicians, but but from a musical technical point of view, a lot of them are like incredibly complex, and I'm always kind of just what's the word? Amazed by that. Someone who's a jazz musician might sit down and write something like that, but if you're not spending all day making music, where does that come from?
So interesting, because I think you're touching on something that, like, for me has been a real, like, identity question.
Okay.
You know, like, what is a musician? You know, people ask me a lot of times, like, are you a musician? You know, and I think, like, no, like, no way. That feels so Western and arbitrary and external on some level. And yeah, I think a lot, I mean, the way, at least in Chabad, how the people who compose these nigunim, they're like balei menagen, right? Someone's a bal menagen. What does that even mean? It means that they're a holder of song, a holder of melody, an owner of melody,
right?
You know? These nigunim came, like, I mean, we could talk a little bit about, like, what the nigunim is, especially, like, in Chabad tradition, Hasidic tradition in general, but these nigunim were born from a spiritual journey, a spiritual yearning, a spiritual dveikut, like, in trying to touch something in the divine, right? And then in Chabad you have, like, a nigun mechuvan, which is a nigun that was mamash composed by, like, a rebbe, for example. And those are considered, like, divine channels, pure divine channels, so much so that if you sing a note out of seder, like, no, you know, like, there's, like, a real stringency around that, and it's sacred. So yeah, I feel like a lot of the composers of the nigunim, and there were certain chassidim who, like, really were, they were like balei menagen, like, they were the composers of the community or whatever it is. There's also certain families, like, it's like the father and the son and the son and the son and the other son, you know, like the Charitanovs, for example, from Nikolaev.
Am I making this up, or at certain points were people either asked by the Rebbe to write stuff, or did they write stuff, like, as a gift for the Rebbe? Is that how it worked sometimes?
Yeah, in the last generation,
right.
Yeah, there's certain, like, a few different nigunim, like a couple that are, like, pretty famous.
For example,
the Rosh Chodesh Kislev nigun.
That's one of my. I think it might be my all-time favorite.
Really?
Yeah, it's just so hopeful.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yes, so for me also, like, that's, like, such a instant joyful, like, brings you from a place that was, like, challenging or potentially challenging to, like, redemption and hope. So yeah, that was composed by, I think, a chassid by the name of Feitza Levin.
Okay.
And it was brought to the Rebbe, and, like, I feel like, you know, there was always, like, a lot of, you know, like, fear and etc. It's, like, so much awe, and then it was, like, approved, you know. It's
so
like,
I'm assuming there was some that didn't get approved. Is that how?
So yeah, possibly. I don't know.
Man, that must be.
I wasn't around. But even the nigun, like the Benoni nigun, was composed by, who was that composed by? It might have even been composed by, like, one of the composers of the time, and that was brought to, I think it was the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe's father-in-law. Well, don't quote me on this.
That's okay.
But and yeah, it was sort of, like, with so much trepidation, and then, like, the nigun was beloved, and that nigun actually became so beloved by the Frierdiker Rebbe that it became his nigun. Like, when we would sing a nigun from every Rebbe, there was a specific time when the Rebbe at some point asked for a nigun from every Rebbe to be sung. This nigun that was so beloved by the Frierdiker Rebbe, that was offered as a gift from his chassid, was actually considered his nigun. And that happens quite a bunch of times. Also, like, the Rebbe Shab's nigun that we usually sing was not composed by him, but it was loved by him.
I'm still kind of like stuck in this idea of, like, you and your friends being part of, you know, because I went to Chabad school till I was probably 10 years old, and used to see all the Rebbe videos, and it was a lot of men with beards and hats, this whole scene, but, you know, you don't necessarily see them on the videos of Fabrangans, but there's also women. There's women behind all the men, which kind of leads me on
upstairs.
Oh, they were
upstairs. In 770, the women are upstairs behind tinted glass.
Okay.
And the truth is, like, I do have a lot of memories from the women's section, but that's really more from when I was in high school, like when I got older. I didn't grow up going to shul with my mother, almost ever. I have like almost no memories going to shul with my mother because she was at home with babies. I've got a bunch of younger siblings, right? I'm like second.
How many?
Well, I'm one of 8.
Wow,
thank God. So, and I'm the second. So I went to shul with my father. Like, I went to shul in the men's section until like I was no longer allowed in the men's section, and people like to ask me when that was, and I
was just about to ask you
I
that.
don't know when it was. Like somewhere between 8 and 11.
Okay.
I don't know. But that was my playground. Whereas, and that feels really, really unique. You know, people who did have moms taking them to shul like didn't get that experience. You know,
it's wild. I mean, I think about my dad was a community rabbi for like over 30 years, and my playground was, you know, his shul. We were like the rabbi's kids who had to behave and.
Oh wow.
Yeah, but it was a playground. That was.
But you were asking just about like musicianship and were these composers and like who were they or whatever. So I mean, both the Alter Rebbe like talked a lot about this, but then there's like this really amazing quote from a chassid and composer named Rapil Paracher.
Okay.
And you for sure know a handful of his nigunim, but one you definitely know, which is the Chabad Hasidut.
Not sure I do, but I have to look it up. Okay.
Yeah, and it's very simple. Special nigunim, not my favorite of his, but one of the ones that people know.
Right.
And he actually said there's 2 versions of his quote, because he was pretty charif. And he said that if you don't have a chush in nigina, you can't have a chush in chassidus.
Whoa.
And then I think the kinder way was, you know, if you really want to have a chush in chassidus, you need to have a chush in nigina.
But what about someone who's tone deaf?
And so it's a real question, like these are real questions that I've been sitting with because like I said, like I didn't grow up as a musician. I have no classical training, no formal training. I'm like really just over the last year, like starting to learn very, very basic musical ideas. And it's like, where does the music come from? You know, what does it mean if someone's tone deaf? Like I've worked with people who are tone deaf and you start to see with time and practice and devotion and connection the things that start to come out. And I'm not saying that as like a blanket statement, but it's pretty extraordinary. Like how, like just like what is music, what is sound, what is voice, what is harmony.
Sure.
And taking a shul as like a playground for that.
Sure.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ask you something about what you just said about you starting to learn about, I guess, the theory side of it. These nigunim and these songs are an extremely non-technical or academic kind of thing. Do you feel that by studying, you know, music theory or any of this stuff that it could potentially lose the magic in a way?
Yeah, I think I need to, like, I'm walking with a lot of gentleness and humility. I asked myself that question just like in terms of like starting to perform, you know, and you're just like powering through, doesn't matter how you're feeling, doesn't matter what's going on or whatever, and telling a story, and you know, sometimes it's alive and sometimes it's not so alive for me, and what does that look like, you know, and how can I like bring whatever is true right here, right now. You know, I guess I have a relationship with these nigunim that are like, they're alive for me.
Sure.
Okay, and like that's actually the work that I do. It's sort of engaging in conversation with the nigun and saying, "Hey, like, what's up today?" You know, and so it's very scary. It's like a very vulnerable process, and so will the magic be? I hope that with all the whatever it is that I learn and like I ask that like my tefillah about it is that I only take in like what I need to take in. And even if I'm gathering different kinds of musical knowledge, that it not affect and impact like my relationship with it. It's a relationship, it's a friendship, it's a love.
Sure.
Like I have a deep love affair with these nigunim.
100%. I have a weird thing in that I love music, but it's also what I do full-time professionally, and like finding that balance and making sure that, you know, if I'm overwhelmed by work, to not be like, okay, well right now I just, you know, sometimes I'll leave the studio for the day, I'll get in the car and I'll drive for an hour in complete silence because I just can't anymore. So I always find it's like a very delicate balance. But
People are pretty shocked to find this out, I think, like including Danny, my husband. Like, I don't listen to a lot of music at all.
Right.
I love music, but like I hear music like in my body, in my mind. Like I like quiet, like a lot.
Yeah.
Like in the quiet is where a lot of stuff is born. Now, of course,
sure.
like I love watching live music. I love watching musicianship. You know, like that's amazing to me, and engaging with other musicians and jamming and singing or whatever. But I don't listen to a lot of recorded music.
Live music is magic, and that's what I want to get to. What is RAZA?
It's an Aramaic word. It means secret or hidden. There's a Hebrew word raz, which is secret or hidden. Most people are familiar with it from, like, there's this tefillah.
RAZA de Shabbat?
Yeah.
Right.
In just before Ma'ariv in Shabbos, and it's like talks about the secret of Shabbos, like RAZA de Shabbos. For me, a couple of years ago, it's like already, I don't know exactly how many years ago, 6 maybe. I was really sick at the time, and not really doing much. And at some point I had this conversation with Dani and with some other people. I was just like, wow, I need to do something for like my spirit, because physically I was really, really ill. And in general, my relationship with health and well-being and the music is very, very interconnected, and we can talk about that or not talk about that. But at this particular point in time, suddenly 3 different people reached out to me and said, we need to sing, like, can you do a thing? And these were people who didn't know that I had like been bedridden for months. Wow. And I think it was Donnie who was just like, let's go, like, do it, you know? And I said, yalla. And he said, I'll take you. Like, I will physically carry you to wherever you need to go and sit you down somewhere, and you will do a thing. And suddenly it was like, okay, cool, we're going to do a RAZA, like RAZA. Now, why, right? Like, why that word? The sound for me of this music, of these nigunim, always, even in my ears, okay, were men. Okay, I grew up singing these nigunim with men in my family, okay? Hearing my father sing it morning to night, okay? Hearing the chassidim in 770 sing it, walking on the street, if you hear a nigun, the boys for bring-ins, my father's students, my brothers for bring-ins, okay? The records that we used to grow up, we grew up with these cassette tapes, right? Like, that was the music in our house, much of the time, a lot of the time. Men, male voices, right? I don't have a male voice. I am me, okay? Yep. And I used to sing these nigunim, and then for years I was singing these nigunim, and as I journeyed like a little bit away from the community, whatever, I would sing these nigunim to myself, right? Like I said, like as a blanket. It didn't sound that way, and then it didn't sound like the sound that I heard in my own ears for the music, right? It's like this weird dissonance. And then after some time that I lived for a while as I was in recovery from my head injury. I was living in the woods, and I was living by myself for a couple months, and I would sing all the time, and I actually used sound and singing and humming like for physical pain relief.
Wow.
And I started to really hear voices singing with me, like angelic voices, and it was like, oh my gosh, like it's not just me, you know, singing these nigunim, and it really made space. There was like a lot more quiet to like have the sounds of the male voices kind of simmer down. And suddenly I was like, wow, I hear this music in like a totally different way. And I just wanted to hear it in real life. And so I said, like, let's see if we can like have, it's like a hidden sound, a sound that's hidden even to me.
Right.
What would happen if like we invited it into the room? And we did that. We had a circle just for women. And I mean, Tov, I was physically really, really, really struggling at that first circle, but all these different people showed up. I don't even remember whose house it was. I had nothing to do with the planning. All these different people showed up. We sang 2 nigunim, I think, in like an hour and a half. And then we did another circle. And the nigunim that I decided to bring, like, I have no idea where they came from. And in this second circle, I suddenly I had a little bit more koach. It was, I think, a month later. And then I brought this nigun that I have no idea why, hualokenu, okay,
Sure.
which is just sung all, it's like, you know, all right, you know. And I literally, I don't know if I like burst into tears or burst out laughing or both, but when the room sang that nigun back to me, and this is a room filled with people who did not grow up singing this nigun for the most part, I was just completely covered. I was like, oh my God, I never heard this. Like, this is what I've been I've been hearing this, you know? It's a different sound, but it's the nigun, you know?
Right.
And so RAZA for me has been it literally is this like hidden sound that has been in the nigunim, I think, all along.
Since you were a little girl, and it's now.
Not since I was a little girl. Since they were composed.
Since they were composed.
I think, like, when a nigun comes into the world, like, it has all these iterations. Just like when we're born, we have all the iterations of everything that we could possibly be. And so there's also all the future iterations of the nigun, you know? And, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, so I guess, like, that's kind of the play, like, the work that I've been doing, like, that's the play that I've been playing with and listening with and dancing with. It's like more of a dance than work. Inviting people in and saying, hey, come listen with me. Like, there's stuff going on here. This nigun's alive. Like, what's going on, you know?
Do you feel like there was almost like a direct correlation between starting this and like getting physically stronger and better?
So that's like it's a really, really special question, because I definitely did not feel that for a number of years, but then now I feel that.
Almost like a delayed reaction to like.
Well, I mean, I recorded the album Mamish a year ago, just over a year ago, like last week it was 1 year. And it was so mind-blowing just that I was physically able to pull that off. I did not do alone, with so much help from friends, extraordinary, like angelic, magical creatures who like believed that like I should even do that, you know, which is not normal, like, which is I don't take for granted. But yeah, this is definitely, I mean, okay, it's been 10 years.
Wow.
But yeah, I feel like doing this like really, really has been giving me life, like physical life force. And yeah, like miraculous healing is possible. I know that. I know that on my flesh, and also the flesh of my brain, like cognitive healing. It's mind blowing.
That's awesome.
So, but I feel like if anybody like really pays attention and does what they're supposed to do in the world, there's deep healing in that.
For sure. Wow, it's inspiring. Okay, so you recorded an album, and now this is basically, I mean, from what I've seen, has turned into sold out shows. What's going on? What's happening? Where's it headed?
Cool. Yes. I mean, I'm happy to speak a little bit more also just about the music that we've been doing. So the album is a recording of, it's like a sample of the music that, it's like a sample, how do you explain?
Of the live experience.
Representation of what had been going on in live spaces, which is that I'm sort of, the main difference is that it includes musical instruments, which usually, at least for a bunch of years, I was doing without any, it was just voice. Part of the reason, the actual honest reason for that is I don't like professionally play any musical instruments.
Okay.
And that was one of the major pieces that ever like prevented me from leading any sort of musical space. And my beautiful teacher, Joey Weisenberg, who's been the person like nudging and probing and bothering me for like over a decade about
to do this,
to just teach nigunim.
Right.
Just be like, you teach a nigun, yeah? Like, you do the thing. And I would just look at him and be like, Joey, I'm a woman. And he'd be like, 2 years later, like, you teach a nigun, you know? He was the one who said, you're doing a circle. I called him when I decided that I was doing this first circle, and he's like, you're doing a circle? And I said, yeah, but what should I do? Should I invite other musicians? And he's like, no musical instruments allowed in the room.
Interesting.
You're in charge, you know? And he really kind of put that, and for me, that was like a deep, deep learning. Like now I'm more like a little bit less intimidated to work with musicians, although
Right.
like I'm generally like the least, like I have the least knowledge in the room. I guess at this point I know that it's not about me or what I know.
Right. I feel like also it probably very much comes down to who the musicians are and making sure they're, you know, you can have loud, in-your-face musicians and then sensitive musicians who...
Yeah, I guess this is also not so much, like I guess the work that I've been doing is not so much for, it's not about like sounding amazing or the most extraordinary like musical arrangement or even like exact tonality, you know. It's really about touching the heart of the nigun and really representing the nigun. So that was a big piece for me. There's not a lot of interpretation. The notes are the nigun and the album. And that was really important for me, sort of like honoring that tradition. There's a lot of musical interpretation around nigunim and all this cool, fancy stuff that's been going on, especially over the last decade. I think it has its place. I think it's awesome that it's going on, and it makes a lot of these nigunim accessible to people who don't listen to sacred devotional music, you know, just for fun, like me. But I do think that a lot of the times the goal in making that kind of music, whether it's like electronic or reggae or whatever,
piano versions.
Yes, whatever it is, I don't know necessarily that the goal there is always staying true to the heart of the nigun and asking the nigun to speak.
Yeah, it's more self-expression.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's like, oh, how do I make this nigun cool for this crowd who's listening to this kind of music, and that's cool. That has like basically nothing to do at all with what I'm doing.
You're really kind of bringing the crowd into the nigun.
Exactly.
That's all, because I think one of the striking things about when I was watching the videos of you guys recording it, first of all, it's awesome that it's very like it's a live, organic kind of one take sort of thing. You know, there's no click track or any of that stuff. But you are essentially, as well as, you know, lead singer, you're kind of conducting everyone in the room, you know, and showing them when they should be louder or quieter, and
it's all so it's all improvised, you know.
Right.
There are these like, we put together these like basic arrangements and even keys
Right.
for the most part, and then it was just like, okay, where are we at? What's going on?
How does it feel?
Yeah. Start something. Oh no. Okay, let's try this again. Okay, great. Let's go. And for me, what I'm doing or trying to do as much as possible is like paying attention. Right now the nigun wants to do this. Like right now, it's this. It's screaming. Let's scream. Like it's silent. It's being playful. It's asking us to be
like a live breathing thing.
It's a living, breathing. It's a living, breathing gift. Like it's a living, breathing miracle. That's a channel for healing too. It's a channel for connection. I guess it's just like, it's davening.
Right.
You know? And so, sure, you can just do this, which a lot of what I grew up with at Farbringen was, we're going to like march the nigun, you know?
Right.
And one day I'll like write a like dissertation about this, but I think that there's an extraordinary value in that too. Like just learning a nigun and marching it through. And that does a certain kind of spiritual work. And it does a really beautiful job of getting you out of the way, which is essentially what the nigun is trying to do anyway.
Right.
But I do think, at least let's say in Chabad, we've gotten very, very comfortable with that mode of spiritual work, of like marching forward
getting it done.
and getting it done. And I also think that in the original revolution of Chabad, there was a different kind of, there was a different way. There was a different relationship. And another interesting thing is like, I grew up, there was like the Chassidim singing together that kind of did this, you know? And then there was the Chassid singing alone, which I got to experience either by listening to my father sing or listening to recordings of old Chassidim singing alone. And that was this like gorgeous individual process that was much more round, you know, as opposed to straight linear. And for me, what I eventually noticed we started doing in the RAZA circles, it was like this blend of both, you know, where there's totally space for this personal and communal. and a personal that does not negate the community, and a communal singing experience that does not negate me as an individual either. And so, and you really hear that. You hear that in the music. Yeah.
How has the reaction from, assuming there has been some kind of reaction from the community that you grew up in?
Yeah, it's been amazing.
Really?
Yeah.
Tell me more.
I have to say, I'm saying like there was like a whole I can't believe the album was recorded, not only because, oh my God, the album was recorded, but like the years, the tears, the rivers of tears that happened in terms of like, firstly, I don't know, I feel like there's been rivers of tears for generations, like for this album to have come out. Mamash, like, we really, when we opened the album recording session, because it was 2 days of recording, and in the evenings is when we did the group.
Sure.
And in the first evening, we invited in, like we did like an opening ceremony, and we invited in all of the composers of the nigunim, because in Chabad tradition, that's who you're welcoming in the room, connecting with them. And we invited in all of the generations of women who would sing these nigunim by themselves, you know? And somebody was saying, like, the room was packed. You know, like the room was packed with souls, like packed, jam-packed, like you couldn't move, you know? The response, so I knew for myself I had to get to a place where I was going to record this no matter what the reaction, nothing to do with any reaction, just like this music has to be out in the world, no one needs to listen to it. Like I even said, like if one person, like if the album gets recorded, nobody hears it, and then in 20 years, like a girl in a Chabad home hears it, like dayenu, enough for me, because she'll probably have also been hearing, so you know, like that was fine for me.
It's one of the beauties of like modern music and streaming. Like you can post it and you have no idea when someone will be typing in this and this nigun, and your result will show up and it could hit them in
and so the response has been really mind-blowing. I don't know Jewish music like that, the kind of diverse audience that has been listening to this music, like to this album, listens to. Like, I mean, we had a concert, I mean, like, it's really wild. I don't know if besides for our wedding, I don't think I've ever been in a place with as many different kinds of Jews.
Wow, that's beautiful.
Like a personal space, not like a public space like the Kotel. Like
the people who aren't Chabad, who are coming to those shows, what do you think draws them in?
Authentic prayer music.
Prayer music.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, people want to connect. Like people want to daven, and not everybody knows anything about davening. Not everybody grew up like with that access point. Not everybody grew up with spiritual tradition. You know, we are so like, I am so lucky that I grew up with such a rich tradition. Not everybody did, specifically a tradition of song, and people are really looking for that.
Yeah, I guess everyone has their. I was saying this to someone yesterday. You know, everyone connects differently, and for me, you know, I struggle in shul, and if I'm going to put my talis and tefillin on, it's normally in this room, without the bright lights, just the moody lights. Amazing sound, and I actually listened to the summer albums, you know, these redone versions of Chabad Nigunim, and that's kind of it for me. Like I put my talis on my head and I feel connected to a higher power, whereas sometimes when I say the words, even if I have learned the translation, I don't know if it's because it's in a different language or, you know, struggling to connect with something that isn't physical, you know, which some people have an easier time with, some people have a harder time. For me, when there's music, it's just, that's it.
Yeah.
Which is why if I go to a show where there isn't singing or it's just not great singing, that's my whole experience kind of depends on that. But it's a crazy powerful thing, and I think it's something that as time goes on, you know, is changing. There's kind of like a shift, I think, also in the religious world, where it's like it's okay for people to, like, not everyone connects in the same way. People do things differently, and things like music or meditation or being out in nature. Like that's just how some people find God, and that's okay.
Yeah. It's not just okay, it's actually like the beginning of Hasidism, like
Right.
was that was the whole
did
thing.
it.
That's why
That's
people
this.
hated Hasidim, right? They were terrified of them. They're like, who are you crazy people? Like, that's not Judaism, right? That's
Right.
not the way. That's not Torah. And they're just like, we are going to dive with the trees. We are going to sing and dance. We are going to be in our bodies. Yeah, I mean, look, the experiences. So it's really like the beginning, right? We've done like 2 concerts. We did like a really amazing concert in Jerusalem.
Yeah, I saw some videos.
That
And my mum was there. My mum
and did you hear what your mom said afterwards?
Oh, I think she. Hold on, I'm pretty sure my mum said in her very English accent, "I don't think men should ever be allowed to sing these songs again," right? Something like that. You go, Mum.
Yeah, that we've been wasting the nigunim on men all these years. Yeah, it's new bringing it to the live space, like in this sort of epic way. It's amazing. We just had a concert in New York 2 weeks ago, literally from today, 2 weeks. And the room had like a nice handful of Lubavitch representation.
That's awesome.
Men and women, you know?
Yeah.
I've gotten letters from Chabad men who have seen the project or listened to the project, you know? And they see how this is impacting their sisters, daughters, mothers. And then there's like this extraordinary musician who reaches out to me and says, I found your music on Spotify. I'm on tour with my band.
Oh, Mike Bogart.
You know?
Yeah.
And he's like, and I can't stop weeping.
Wow.
I can't stop crying. Can't stop crying. Like, I'm on a journey. He didn't even realize this music was connected to Chabad. Anyway, we just like played music together and met. And there's like all these different, and he just literally, the music came up for him on Spotify or something. You know,
that's amazing.
A woman, somebody reached out to me who grew up close by to me and said, like, "Oh my God, like we're about the same age," and she always just like saw the Hasidim. And so this music has been like a really interesting bridge for me with my home community.
Sure.
For my home community, like for the women and men in my home community, like who've never really connected in or saw that music or this music of our childhood could be like a really authentic living channel to spirituality.
Sure.
And an extraordinary bridge between the Hasidic community and other people. Other people who, it's not, you know what's so cool? Because like people do, you know, there are these, like, there will be shows, like TV shows or art exhibits or whatever it is, like Life of Hasidus, you know, Hasidim.
Normally not made by Hasidic people.
Orthodox people, yeah.
Or trying to make them look bad.
But whether it is or not, but it's always like a snapshot or whatever. And this is an invitation to just come inside. Like there's no airs. It's saying, here, like, I guess like somebody just wrote about the concert that we did, and he said, if you were a member of the choir / audience, you know, the audience is the choir, the audience is the band, you know? And so it's the same thing when you listen to the album. Like, you're not a listener, you're not
it's not a passive experience.
Yeah, it's like you're invited in. And so that's a really special thing.
Right, it's awesome. I guess through this series, I say I want to get to the bottom of, but I don't think there is. There's no end goal, and I don't necessarily think there's an answer, which is why it's so interesting to me, because based on the conversations I've had even before I started doing this, it seems to be like a deeply personal thing, depending on who you're asking. But if someone who wasn't me, someone who maybe knew nothing about Judaism or Jewish people, you know, you bumped into them tomorrow somewhere and they said, what is Jewish music? What is it? What is that? How would you respond?
So it's so fascinating because I'm actually in this conversation now. There's like all this talk about, so we won't get into this, I'll just tell you that there's all this conversation about that there's no Jewish music category or non-Christian category.
I'm part
in
of
the Grammys.
the,
You're
the
part of the
committee
conversation.
thing, yeah.
Okay, cool. So right now we're not able to submit, there's like, you're actually not allowed to submit music with religious content. Like we're trying to submit KAPELYA.
Right.
There's no category that's a non-Christian category that you're allowed to submit liturgical music for.
Right.
which is like a major discrimination issue.
Sure. Which is why they started these talks.
It's wild. But then the answer was submit your music, but you're actually legally not allowed to because it doesn't qualify in any categories. But anyway,
to explain for anyone who
Yeah.
doesn't know, that there's currently I guess a drive. There's a whole bunch of Jewish musicians and artists and singer-songwriters and people who care who have come together to try and petition the Recording Academy, who have the Grammys, to have a category for Jewish music. I actually found it very interesting when I was invited to be on that first Zoom meeting with everyone involved. It was right before I decided to do this podcast, and as they were having this whole discussion, people were talking about it, I could see that one of the biggest issues that they're going to come up with is what is it?
Yeah,
what is this thing? What qualifies?
So yeah, it's really interesting because something that I've been reflecting on so much is how, I mean, just since you asked me this question, and just in general, just like kind of surveying the scene, because like I have definitely said so many times of my life, like just Jewish music or music that has Hebrew words in it from like the liturgy, some sort of that I don't like because it's a musical genre or style that I don't like. I'm just like, this is not Jewish music. Like this is Jewish, or Jewish music sucks, or modern Jewish music sucks. Like I think that, okay, hold on one second. A couple of weeks ago, I was in this session with my teacher, and he was playing musical instruments. And the question to the group, we were this large group of people, and he asked them, like, is this davening? Like, I'm gonna play like my mandolin, and you're gonna tell me, like, is this davening, or is this maybe davening, or like not davening? Okay. And he did that. He played a little piece there. He played another instrument. Played this like Eastern instrument. Played the electric guitar. Somebody played the flugelhorn. Okay. And it was so fascinating because at the end of it, it was like, wow, your response actually just tells more about you and your history and your nostalgia and association with tefillah than it has anything to say about the music. And what I realize is, like, I actually think that, like, the same thing is with Jewish music, It's like the way that you describe Jewish music tells more about your history and your childhood and your positive or negative associations with your Judaism and or music and or prayer and or your family than it actually says about Jewish music. Because Jewish music is music of the Jews, okay? It's music from Jews, by Jews, with Jews, telling a story of Jews, from Jewish tradition, indigenous to Judaism, popular, contemporary now, but written by Jews. Like, it's just as wide an expanse, as music in general.
Which is probably why they're struggling at the Grammys to figure out how to deal with that.
What it goes, right. But I guess that's also so extraordinary because I think a lot of us Jews, we forget how diverse the Jewish nation is, and I know for myself, like, I'm still humbled and blown away when I'll go into a shul from, an Eastern tradition.
Sure.
And the music is so heart-wrenching and it like moves you in the gut and whatever. And it may be so much more glorious and extraordinary than the Nigun that I grew up singing. And it's moving the people in the room the way I see it. I see it's dripping down their faces. And for me, a little recording from whatever it is, like, does that to me. From like an Eastern European, whatever it is, or from A.B. Rottenberg, And so we're all just raised and have different, like, we're raised differently. We have different nostalgia looks different for everybody. And I think a lot of how people will describe Jewish music just describes their own experience with Jewish music.
For sure. Okay. That's cool. That's cool.
For me, Jewish music is music that is sacred and connects me to the divine. But that's because my Jewish music, for the most part, consists of like nigunim.
Right.
And music from the 70s and 80s and early 90s, like the Jewish music which was a direct reflection of the contemporary music of the time, which is why I don't like Jewish music that's recorded today. Because I don't listen to contemporary music right now, popular music. It's not my vibe. What about like Hanan Ben Ari? Like, what about all these Israeli, or like Ravid Kahlani,
or Noel Kalmi, who I spoke to last week. So, which is why a big part of this and many of these interviews are actually going to be done in Israel.
And all of the Paitanim and Paitaniyot that are
the music from there's Ethiopia and Morocco and like there's. So I really kind of want to. And then there's the other kind of Hasidim, and it's huge.
And then there's like secular Jewish, there's Jewish music that is just all written in English, that is inspired by, unaffiliated or like non-liturgical music that is not sung by a bearded man.
Also something like, Fiddler on the Roof. It's oozing with Judaism, right? But like... Is it Jewish? Is it not? Like the music. Anyway, it's something.
It's also like, is kosher style Jewish style?
Exactly.
It's like, is matzo ball soup Jewish? And it's like, it is, but it's not necessarily kosher.
I think also that's what makes this exciting for me, is knowing that it's kind of a endless pursuit, really just kind of collecting opinions and different kinds of music and different people and their experiences. I have a dream to eventually do some kind of project that kind of melds all of this together in a wild way. Like imagine a chassid from Williamsburg singing with a couple of guys, I don't know, a Taimani singer, or like to really bring to that power of who we are as a people, because it's very hard to understand or to, even when you talk about it, but like anything, I feel nothing conveys something more than music, and it's one of my goals for when I have time, if I ever have time.
Man, yeah. One of my dreams is I love lullabies.
Okay.
And so one of my dreams is to like record an album with lullabies from just across the world of Jewish tradition.
That's awesome. I love that idea.
And it's like, it's so wild because music goes so deep.
Right.
And so you can really meet a person and a culture. You can meet like a whole culture when you touch like an authentic melody.
The same way that you grew up with the tunes that you had, you can almost be deciding what could shape what other people hear as small Jewish kids. What does the future look like? Where are you headed?
Personally?
You personally with the RAZA project.
Oh, wow! I love that question. I would love to sing more with more people, getting to experience this music in different living ways, like in different formations, alive, is so awesome and so healing. For me, for the people who are there, for the world.
Sure.
I want to record like all of Chabad Nigunim, like all the Chabad Nigunim.
Okay.
So,
shouldn't take too long.
Many more albums. I don't know. I wonder. I also think that because it's like alive and dynamic and so audience, like so choir based,
If you could go in a time machine and talk to 5-year-old Chana back in 770, in between all the men when you could just about see, and you were in the presence of Rebbe listening to these songs, imagining maybe you and your friends or women singing them, what would you say?
I think about her all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because of this music, like because it's I think I would like tell her to keep paying attention as she is, and to keep playing, like as adults, like we think that like the way to do things is like to be very serious about them and there is something to that, but I was a kid playing, and I think I would just smile and give me a hug. Wow. Because it's like, actually I learned all of these nigunim just by existing and listening and playing and davening and jumping and skipping and eating candy, like Lieber's Winkies.
Right.
Like that's what, yeah. And living something, I feel like that's the way to internalize it and
Right.
listen. And essentially, I feel like as adults, like, and we're gathering in these like RAZA circles or anywhere you're gathering to sit down and have a conversation or sing a nigun or daven, like, I feel like what we're trying to do essentially is to go back to be that 5-year-old self without care, without worry, without fear, and without inhibition,
Sure.
without all the knowledge of what the thing that I'm about to do is supposed to be.
Right.
And just be there.
Wow. That's good advice.
You know?
Okay, well, thank you for coming today on this very early, even though it's before 10 o'clock and we've already managed to do this. So I really appreciate you coming and telling us about it, and wish you tons of luck going forward. I'm excited to see what you do.
Yeah, excited to see what you do.
Let's see what happens.